By the early 2000s, the Command & Conquer series had established itself as a titan in the world of real-time strategy, known for its gripping battles, resource management, and epic-scale conflicts. But in 2002, Westwood Studios took a bold leap, flipping the formula on its head and dropping players directly onto the battlefield with Command & Conquer Renegade. As the series' first foray into first-person action, Renegade gave fans the chance to experience the CNC universe from an entirely new perspective. Playing as GDI Commando Nick Havoc Parker, players swapped the bird's eye view for boots on the ground, engaging in pulse-pounding shootouts, commandeering vehicles, and infiltrating Nod bases. It was an ambitious blend of strategy and action, offering a unique glimpse into the world that fans had previously only commanded from afar. Today, we're revisiting the explosive history of Command & Conquer Renegade, exploring its bold gameplay innovations, its place in the CNC legacy, and its lasting impact on Westwood Studios. So load your weapons, gear up, and join us for today's mission down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello and welcome to the 235th episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people who have created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby video games a reality. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today, we are jumping into Command & Conquer Renegade, the 2002 spin-off that brought the iconic real-time strategy franchise into the first-person shooter realm. Mixing fast-paced combat with the strategic depth of its RTS roots, Renegade offered a fresh perspective on the Command & Conquer universe. I'm David Caston, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, who'd probably drive a tank into his own base just to add to the chaos. He's my brother, Rob Caston. Rob, do you think that you are better at commanding a squad or just blowing stuff up on the battlefield?
Well, as the commander, I'm already blowing stuff up anyway, so.
Those are one and the same for you?
Absolutely.
Are they also separate, though?
They can be.
But not for you.
I mean, depends on the time. Sometimes you don't need a command.
You just command the squad and blow shit up while doing it. So you're always in charge.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Every squad needs a leader.
Every squad needs a leader indeed. Well, before we get into Command & Conquer Renegade, why don't you tell our listeners what else has happened during this current week in gaming history?
Well, kicking it off, on February 24th, 1999, Silent Hill was released for the Sony PlayStation, forever redefining the survival horror genre. Developed by Konami's Team Silent, the game introduced players to the eerie, fog-shrouded town of Silent Hill as protagonist Harry Mason searched for his missing daughter. Praised for its psychological approach to horror, Silent Hill used atmospheric visuals, haunting sound design, and a deeply unsettling narrative to create an experience that was more about dread and tension than jump scares. Its blend of emotional storytelling and terrifying imagery left an indelible mark on gaming history. For more on how Silent Hill and its themes shaped the survival horror genre, tune in to episode 26.
Yes, indeed.
Indeed. Next up, on February 23rd, 2000, SimCity 64 was released in Japan for the Nintendo 64 DD, bringing Maxis's iconic city-building simulation to Nintendo's experimental peripheral. Developed by HAL Laboratory in collaboration with Maxis, the game expanded upon the classic SimCity formula with unique features, such as a first-person perspective for exploring cities and a day-night cycle that added a new layer of immersion. Leveraging the 64DD's writable magnetic disc, Players could save and expand their cities, while the peripheral's additional processing power enabled more detailed visuals compared to earlier SimCity titles. Despite its innovative gameplay and enhancements, SimCity 64 remained exclusive to Japan due to the limited reach of the 64DD, making it a rare and fascinating entry in the SimCity series.
And if you're curious what the 64DD is, we covered that. There's an episode
Yeah,
on it somewhere.
go find it.
Go find it.
Next, on March 1st, 2007, EA began selling game soundtracks on the iTunes Store, marking a significant milestone in the gaming industry's recognition of video game music as a standalone art form. This initiative allowed fans to access and enjoy the iconic scores from EA's popular franchises, such as The Sims, Need for Speed, and today's topic, Command and Conquer, outside of context of gameplay. By making these soundtracks widely available, EA helped elevate the appreciation for video game music while also diversifying its revenue streams. This move paved the way for other developers to follow suit, further establishing video game scores as an integral part of modern pop culture. Thank goodness they did.
Yes, indeed.
On February 25th, 2014, Thief was released, rebooting the classic stealth action franchise for a modern audience. Developed by Eidos Montreal and published by Square Enix, the game reintroduced players to Garrett, the master thief, in a dark, Victorian-inspired world known as the City. The reboot emphasized stealth-based gameplay, allowing players to traverse environments unseen, pickpocket guards, and plan meticulous heists. Despite its atmospheric design and nods to the series' legacy, the game faced mixed reviews due to its simplified mechanics and narrative inconsistencies compared to its predecessors. Nonetheless, Thief rekindled interest in the stealth genre and brought Garrett's shadowy escapades to a new generation of gamers. We talked about the Thief franchise and its origins back in episode 223, so if you want to learn more, go check it out. And last up, we have on February 27th, 2018, one of the weirdest damn games ever played. David Lynch teaches typing, delivering a quirky, surreal take on typing tutorial games. This was created by developer Rhino Stew and was an indie project parodying traditional typing programs with the inclusion of an uncanny virtual version of filmmaker David Lynch. Blending dark humor and Lynchian absurdity, the game offered bizarre lessons on typing that often veered into philosophical monologues or surreal scenarios. Its unconventional approach and homage to Lynch's distinct style made it a niche but beloved title among fans of eccentric gaming experiences. We checked it out in episode 131 on the history of typing games, so type our website into your browser and go give it a listen. Fair warning, it's freaking weird.
It's weird, but it's free, and it's like, what, 10 minutes of your time?
I don't remember how long, but it was very weird 10 minutes if that's the case.
I don't even know if it was 10 minutes. Like, it's such a short experience, but it's weird and hilarious and also very Lynchian. And we lost David Lynch recently, so that's sad. You know, lose all the good ones. So, it's been a while since we've talked about the Command and Conquer franchise. 126 weeks, in fact. We covered the series origins way back in episode 109. The studio that created Command and Conquer is Westwood Studios, and they started out doing contract work for companies like Epix and SSI Strategic Simulations, porting games that were originally made for 8-bit computers over to 16-bit platforms. And they were successful at this. They did a lot of porting for a while and made some decent money. And they decided that they were going to use said money to start developing their own titles. And one of the early ones that they developed was a real-time tactics game called Battletech: The Crescent Hawk's Revenge. And that game laid some of the groundwork for the real-time strategy genre that would come shortly after. Now, we talked about the Crescent Hawk's Revenge briefly in episode 132. It was an episode in which we learned about the entire BattleTech franchise, BattleTech itself, its origins, and then we kind of briefly, touched on the history of BattleTech games, including that one. So if you'd like to learn all about BattleTech and giant mechs and weird alternate timelines, episode 132 is for you. They kind of got their start there with the BattleTech game and porting all these games, but they really first found significant success in 1991 with a role playing game based on the Dungeons and Dragons license called Eye of the Beholder. And at some point after making Eye of the Beholder, sometime in that following year, they were introduced by Graham Devine, who eventually would go on to make Seventh Guest and found Trilobite, of all people, because he worked there at the time. They were introduced to a Sega console title. It was for the Mega System and the Genesis, called Herzog's Way. And Herzog's Way was a real time strategy game, and it is pretty much the granddaddy of the real time strategy genre. It's the first in a lot of ways. And the team were all big fans of the game, played it a lot, but they all kind of looked at it and said, you know what? We think that there is room for improvement here and here and here. Yeah. At about the same time, the team at Virgin Interactive, one of their publishing partners, came to Westwood Studio to talk about making a game set in the Dune universe. They had all the success with licenses and BattleTech and Dungeons and Dragons, and Virgin Interactive had just gotten the Dune license, and so they came to Westwood, saying, "Hey, we have this license. We want you to do something in it." And that's a fun, convoluted story because Virgin went to more than one studio, and there's actually two games that came out of that mess. Um, what came out of Westwood's commitment to that license is the 1992 real time strategy title Dune to the Building of a Dynasty, which we covered in episode 118. Has its own episode. And the reason why it has its own episode is because it is pretty much the game that established the real time strategy genre. Herzog's Way may be the beginning, but many of the key gameplay mechanics, many of the traits that we still to this day associate with, real time strategy, they all basically come from Dune 2. Concepts like resource gathering started there, technology trees, different factions that have their own unique units and special weapons. These are all concepts that Dune 2 pioneered. As they were wrapping up work on Doom 2, the team basically said, "Hey, what couldn't we put into this game?" What they had been making a list as they went along, and basically they took that list and they said, "So, what's our wish list?" And they took that wish list and they turned it into an original title, an intellectual property that they created, uh, set in a modern combat environment, and they called it Command and Conquer. Command and Conquer, of course, is a successful real time strategy game. It tells the story of a world war between two globalized factions, the Global Defense Initiative, which is kind of like the United Nations, and then the Brotherhood of Nod. Good guys and bad guys is kind of the way it's coined. So GDI and Brotherhood of Nod. Funny enough, in case you didn't know, the first game in the series on the timeline actually takes place between 2017 and 2020. So we're living in the Command and Conquer timeline right now.
That makes a lot of sense.
Doesn't it? Makes a lot of sense. Command and Conquer was incredibly successful. Critics loved it. It's still online. It scores a 94 out of 100 online. It was a commercial success too. Sold over 3 million copies. It did. And we are Command and Conquer fans, are we not, Rob?
You more so than me, but definitely have played it.
Definitely have played it. Do you
Yeah.
know which ones? Do you remember which ones you've played?
Red Alert 2, maybe?
Red Alert 2?
One of the Red
Fun,
Alerts.
Red Alert 2 would literally be the game right before what we're talking about today. On the like like when they published it would have been exactly the time period we're talking about today. So you picked a good time period to be familiar with the series and the game. So
Hell yeah, let's go.
let's go. So we have Command and Conquer. Command and Conquer comes out very good and commercial success. And we know from experience, if you've listened to this podcast, you know time and time again, when a games development studio and a publisher have a successful title, they tend to want to make another, right?
Yeah,
Because
I'd
money,
say
money, right? Money,
money.
money. So Command and Conquer was followed up with a prequel set in an alternate timeline called Command and Conquer Red Alert. And Red Alert was even more popular than its predecessor. It was released on November 22nd, 1996. And when the year rolled over to 1997, so just over a month, it ended up as the seventh best selling computer game for the entirety of 1996. It sold incredibly well and continued to sell incredibly well too. Just knocking the boots off everything. So of course Westwood had to ride the gravy train and continue to develop games in the Command and Conquer universe.
Right. One would.
Why not? Money.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh, I would. I mean, you don't want to beat a dead horse, but you want to milk it for all it can. Can you
A little
milk
weird
me?
to put it that way,
Do I have
but
nipples?
uh, move on, Dave. Let's go.
As the team was working on creating expansion packs for Red Alert in the Red Alert universe, they were also working on porting Red Alert over to the Sony PlayStation. And somewhere in this process, we know that the team at Westwood was experimenting with a 3D environment on the PlayStation. Dated July 14th, 1997, there is an unreleased PlayStation 1 demo, which was eventually leaked. We didn't see it until 2014. And that demo is labeled Command and Conquer Commando. And when you start this up, you can go online. We'll link it in our show notes. The video's out there. It has four options. There's a model viewer, a player test, a terrain test, and an option called Jogging Around Atlanta.
Okay.
I know, right? Now, the model view features three models. There's a basic test model, there's a commando model, and then there is a tank, a flame tank. Both of which the commando and the flame tank are units in the Command and Conquer universe. And depending on your choice, of course, the model was just spinning. You could just spin the camera around models. But the other three, the player test, the terrain test, and jogging around Atlanta, just have different models moving around an environment. If in case you're wondering about the Atlanta one, it seems that they ported a level over from a game called Sports Car GT, and then they just plugged their model into it to walk around the Atlanta racetrack. So,
Nice.
yeah. But here in 1997, this team at Westwood is basically playing in a 3D engine. They made a 3D engine, they made a commando model, and they made a tech demo. Nothing ever came of it that we know of. I mean, let's not say that because we're getting somewhere. But Command and Conquer Commando, so to speak, for the PlayStation no less, never amounted to anything. Still, I think that this shows that they were thinking about it as early as 1997, and it's evidence that somewhere someone saw some merit in bringing Command and Conquer into a 3D environment, right?
Yeah, definitely.
By this point, the team had moved on to further games in the Command and Conquer universe because Red Alert was successful, so of course you're going to keep going. So we got another title, Command and Conquer Tiberian Sun. That's a sequel to the original Command and Conquer, and that was released in August of 1999. Tiberian Sun in 1998, Westwood was actually bought by Electronic Arts, so Tiberian Sun was actually published as Electronic Arts game. And when it was released, it actually became the fastest selling game on what was now called the EA Games publishing label. It sold 1.5 million copies in its first month.
Damn.
So the hype for Command and Conquer games, to be fair, was incredibly high at that point. High, right? Lots of, I mean, that, 1.5 million people showed up in a month.
That's insane.
And I think, too, as we look into Renegade, that we need to take a look at some historical context to understand why, what, when, where, right? Because the late 90s into the early 2000s had some excellent additions to the first person shooting genre. 1997, Rob, was GoldenEye 007. 1998 was Half-Life and Unreal Tournament, which made it faster, and multiplayer was 1999. 1999 was Counter-Strike. 1999 was the first time we ever saw Halo at E3. We may not have played it for a few years, but it was released to the world as a demo in 1999.
Damn.
Right,
That was a stacked few years.
I know Rainbow Six got its start in 98. Medal of Honor's first game was 1999.
Oh, damn. They really stacked it.
A lot of golden staples to the first person shooting genre all started in the late 90s, right?
Yeah.
And so that was the culture. Those were the games that people were playing, those were the games that people were talking about. These were what everyone was paying attention to. I mean, Half-Life blew everyone's minds. Everyone wanted to play Unreal, Counter-Strike. I mean, Counter-Strike. Shoot, when I went away to college 4 years later, we were still playing Counter-Strike.
True.
All the time. These were the games that people were paying attention to. There was a lot of innovation in that genre at the time, and it was a great game for it was a great time for real-time strategy games. Don't get me wrong, 1997 would have been Age of Empires, right? And Command and Conquer was cruising along. The late 90s would have been Warcraft. There were a lot of great games in real-time strategy genre, but in general, real-time strategy games, or StarCraft was 99. um, Real-time strategy just doesn't get the recognition that first-person shooter was. First-person shooter was getting all the attention. And so I really have no doubt that as, the team at Westwood was working first on this PlayStation demo and continuing to make games in the Command and Conquer universe, that there was just a business decision made somewhere to bring what was a very popular gaming series in Command and Conquer into the genre that was getting all the attention at the time, right?
Right.
It just made sense. It just made sense to make a first person shooter because everybody was making a first person shooter at the time. That was what those were the big titles. Somewhere in this process, as these new games are being made and people are, hung up on the Counter Strikes of the world, Westwood makes the decision to license what's called the Surrender 3D engine. And Surrender was a 3D engine originally developed by Hybrid Graphics, Hybrid Graphics being a Finnish company that had many talented programmers from what's called the demo scene. Remember that, Rob?
Can't say I do, Dave.
We've talked about the demo scene in more than one episode.
Oh,
Just
darn. Guess people
I
have to go out and find other episodes to hear about them.
They will indeed have to go back and look at any episodes that have Finnish developers, like Remedy. That would be our episode on Max Payne. That's very much where a lot of the Denmark Finnish, gaming industry comes from, is the demo scene. Man, we even talked about the awards they won one episode. That was a lot of fun. The
Indeed.
Surrender engine, it wasn't like a Unreal or Unity, not a fully fledged engine like we know nowadays. Instead, it was one piece of licensed technology that developers would license and use for their own purposes. So Surrender is exactly what they did. They licensed this 3D engine and they basically modified it for their own whims. Is basically the way to put it. It was modified to include real world physics. It was modified to allow for seamless movement from indoor to outdoor environments. They basically had a checklist of things that they wanted to do. They had a vision of where they wanted to go with that little tech demo, and they modified the Surrender engine to have the capabilities that they needed, right?
Right.
And there was a purpose. Renegade was a thing. In house, they actually called this the Renegade engine. It was also known as the Westwood 3D engine. If you look it up online, it's W3D, the Westwood 3D engine.
Interesting name.
Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? No, I'm just kidding. In September of 1999, in the midst of all this going on, Westwood officially announces Command and Conquer Renegade. It's announced as a first person shooter set in the Command and Conquer universe. They decided to have this game take place in the final days of what's known as the First Tiberium War. And that's the war that's depicted in the first Command and Conquer game. So we're basically playing the final days of the campaign in the first Command and Conquer game is where this all takes place. In the original trailer, which was first shown in May of 2000, you played as a commando. His name was Lieutenant Logan Shepard. There is a General Shepard, so there's some relation there. And it basically just has him running around, wrecking havoc in against enemies, against different units in the real time strategy in the Command and Conquer universe, and just doing all the things that commandos do. For unknown reasons, Lieutenant Logan Shepard did not end up as the main character in the game. Instead, they ended up writing a story in which you're a GDI commando named Captain Nick Havoc Parker. So his name is Havoc. And he is assigned to rescue research specialists who have been abducted by the bad guys, the brother of Nod. Logan, if you're a Logan Shepard fan, but he did not disappear. Don't worry. He just became the instructor for the tutorial of the game. He's also selectable as one of the characters in the game's multiplayer mode. He just didn't end up being the main character, right?
Good.
In September of 1999, when the game was announced, it was said to have a shipping date somewhere in the spring of 2000. Unfortunately, spring of 2000 came and went, and there was no Command and Conquer Renegade. And so Westwood came out and made a promotional video poking fun at their inability to release on time. Now, I want to preface this by saying that what the one thing the Command and Conquer games are very well known for is their full motion video cutscenes, right?
Right.
They are cheesy, they are campy, they are B movies. They are low budget, well, they got high budget by this point, but they were low budget films that helped tell the story, and they were a lot of fun. A lot of people who like Command and Conquer love the story and the cutscenes. They're just
Top notch.
top notch. That's the way to put it. And so, frankly, making full motion video was their thing. That was kind of what they were known for. So as this release date for the game comes and it goes, they basically say, "Hey, we're gonna put out this video. We're gonna put out this video." And so it's titled "Havoc Takes on Westwood," and they released it on November 27th, 2001. So well past the release date, right? And it features the main character of the game, Havoc, his real person character, and he's raiding the offices of Westwood in order to make sure that the developers don't miss the game shipping date again.
Nice.
And it basically features Havoc breaking into the Westwood offices to berate and humiliate its employees in order to make sure that the game ships at a new promised date. Now,
That's
again,
unique.
if you want to see it, it's in the show notes. It's fantastic. One of my favorite parts, Havoc confronts the executive producer, and he goes, "I hear that Command and Conquer Renegade has slipped past its release date," and then he shoves his lady slip into the guy's hands, and he goes, "I think you should wear this." So it's that kind of really cheesy, campy humor that Command and Conquer is known for. He goes through the offices, terrorizes it. he actually runs into the actor who plays Kane, the main guy to Brotherhood of Nod. He asks for a signature. Amusingly enough, or not amusingly enough, they actually spell, because they have the name, like every time he comes up to a new character in the video, it says this is so and so in their title. And when they come up to the actor for Kane, it has his name spelled wrong. It's Joseph Coogan, but they spelled it wrong. But it says Joseph Coogan, evil dictator. So he gets the evil dictator signature, and then he runs outside where there's a military vehicle waiting for him with the VP of sales in the back of it. The VP of sales breaks open the doors and said, "Did you get the point across that we need the game to come out?" And Havoc goes, "Yeah, sure." And he goes, "Get in," and they speed off in the military vehicle.
That is definitely something. Go check it out. Show
Yeah,
notes.
it's a really amusing piece of video game history. Really fun. You should check it out. We'll link to it in our show notes. A little bit of irony. They ended up missing the promised date there too.
Of course.
So, it didn't stick, unfortunately. But they did eventually get the game done. Like all good things come to those who wait. They did eventually get the game done, and it came out eventually, February 26th, 2002. Rob, after hearing about Command and Conquer Renegade and how it kept getting delayed, and how Westwood even made a whole promotional video poking fun at themselves for missing deadlines, it really reminds me how some projects just take longer than expected, but the results can still be worth the wait.
Yeah, I love that they leaned into the joke instead of just ignoring it. Sometimes the best things take time, but when they finally come together, it's an awesome feeling. Kind of like starting a podcast.
Exactly. And if you've ever wanted to start your own podcast but felt overwhelmed by the process, Zencaster makes it easier than ever.
Tell me more, though. What makes Zencaster stand out?
Well, Zencaster is an all in one podcasting platform that lets you record high quality audio and video straight from your browser. There's no complicated setups, no expensive equipment. Just log in, hit record, and start sharing your voice.
Well, that sounds simple enough, but what about editing? I imagine that could be a nightmare when you don't know what you're doing.
Sure can, but that's where Zencaster really shines. Their post production tools automatically clean up your audio, balance sound levels, and even remove background noise and filler words like or ah. It's like having your own audio engineer without the extra cost.
Well, that's awesome. And once my podcast is ready, how do I get it out there for people to listen?
Well, Zencaster makes distribution effortless. You can send your podcast straight to major platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more, all from one place. There are no extra steps and no hassle.
Well, I'm convinced. So, how can I and our listeners get started?
Well, that's easy. Just head over to zencaster.com/pricing and use our offer code, all one word, memory card lane. You'll get 30% off the first month of any Zencaster paid plan. Whether you're just starting out or looking to take your own podcast to the next level, Zencaster has the tools to make you sound like a pro.
Now, that's a great deal. So, listeners, if you've ever thought about starting a podcast, now is the perfect time to jump in.
Absolutely. Head over to zencaster.com/pricing and use our offer code, memory card lane, and you can start your podcasting journey today.
All right, let's get back to Command and Conquer Renegade and talk about what came once it was finally released.
Command and Conquer Renegade, probably a game that a lot of our listeners haven't heard of. Had you heard of it before, Rob?
You know, I cannot say that I had ever heard of Renegade, Dave.
A lot. I think it's fair to say that it didn't quite touch gaming culture the way some of these other first person shooters did. I will admit, as an original release, I had no clue it existed. I don't remember any hype around it. I don't remember much. I know at the time, StarCraft would have been 99, so by this time, StarCraft Ghost was probably a thing, which was StarCraft's attempt to do something similar, and there was a lot of hype around StarCraft Ghost. We also had Diablo going on at the time, because Diablo 2 would have been in that time period. So there was just a lot going on elsewhere. I don't remember Command and Conquer Renegade. Now, that being said, it has been re-released a few times, starting with Command and Conquer: The First Decade, and I did have an opportunity to touch it back then. And there's actually a way for people to play it now, which we'll get to momentarily. But I don't like I was sitting there beating my head against this as I was doing my research for this episode, and I got nothing. Like I don't remember it at all. 2002 February would have been my what senior year of high school, so I would have been getting ready to graduate. To be fair, so
That's not a good excuse,
I
Dave.
don't remember what I I think about that sometimes, like what I was playing at certain time periods. I don't remember what I was playing in February of 2002. I don't know. I should look at like best-selling titles and find out.
Mm-hmm.
I have an idea. I mean,
What?
to be fair, people were focused on other games. I know it took me some time to catch up with it, but uh, when Command and Conquer Renegade came out, that was only 4 months after Halo was released, the original Halo.
Mm.
And the Xbox, right? Because it was a launch title
Mm-hmm.
for the Xbox. We're 4 months into the launch of the Xbox, and I would argue that changed things. Halo absolutely changed first person shooters with, I would call it, revolutionary multiplayer gameplay.
Yeah, I would agree with that
We were
statement.
all we were all hooked on Slayer at at the time.
Yep.
That's not to say that Command and Conquer Renegade didn't sell. To be fair, in its first 4 months, it sold 250,000 copies. That earned it about $7.8 million in unit sales. So it did sell, right? It sits at a 75 out of 100 on Metacritic, so it was received okay. And really, as you go through some of the reviews, which of course, you can always go to their wiki, do some research, as you drill down into them, the general consensus was that Westwood wasn't a studio that made first person shooter games, and you could tell. But the thing of it is that really seemed to be Westwood's MO at the time, right? Because elsewhere in the studio, they were busy making a science fiction MMO that was called Earth and Beyond, and it also didn't do well. So, for a time period, they were experimenting outside of this genre that had been their bread and butter for so long, and just everything wasn't hitting, unfortunately. Earth and Beyond had the same engine. It also used that Westwood 3D engine as a side note, so they were just kind of multi-purpose, using it everywhere. I don't remember Earth and Beyond either. I must have been doing other things at the time. Like I had previously noted, Westwood was actually acquired by Electronic Arts back in 1998. Renegade and Earth and Beyond were both 2002 releases. One was February, one was November. And you can imagine, knowing EA's reputation, what an entire year of, I guess, unsuccessful games does for an EA studio.
No bueno.
No bueno. Yeah, I'm sure that you already know. EA decided to shut Westwood Studios down. So the studio with all the pedigree that had been making Command and Conquer games successfully for years upon years upon years had a bad year, but they were an EA studio now, and so um, EA said toodaloo, shut them down. March of 2003, Westwood Studios defunct. So that was unfortunate. Earth and Beyond ended up being the last game they ever developed. Command and Conquer Renegade ends up being the last time Westwood Studios ever touches a Command and Conquer product. Despite the fact that the studio was gone, its assets were not. For one, the Westward 3D engine became an engine called Sage, also known as the Strategy Action Game Engine, and it was used in future titles that were released by other EA studios. They include that included future titles in the Command and Conquer universe, including the next games, which were Command and Conquer Generals, and then after that, we got Command and Conquer 3, Tiberium Wars. So those were Sage titles. It also included, Rob, both of the Lord of the Rings Battle for Middle Earth games. which we're fans of, are we not?
Oh yeah, that's one I'm familiar with.
Yeah, we love Battle for Middle Earth 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
And both of those were created on the Sage engine, which was made from the remnants of, the Renegade engine, basically.
Well, thank goodness that it happened then.
That's right. We got something out of its legacy. The engine would get some upgrades through the years. They upgraded it, through genres. PS2, PS3 kept going, and the PCs were getting more powerful, so I had to go with that. To be fair, Sage is still used. It's not, well, yeah, it is still used. I'll explain that momentarily.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it is still used, and I found something out cool about it when I was working the other day, researching for this episode. And, anyways, the Sage engine would get some upgrades, and it ended up being used also for Command and Conquer Red Alert 3 and Command and Conquer 4. So the technology that started with Renegade would carry on for almost a decade, because Command and Conquer 4 came out in 2010. Last year, what I said momentarily, last year EA released Command and Conquer: The Ultimate Collection. It might have been 2023, but it was last, more recently than not, right? And the Ultimate Collection is a dozen titles in the Command and Conquer universe. Renegade's one of them, up to 4. So it's from the beginning up to 4, basically, and they all use the Sage engine. And basically, I found a GitHub repository of someone who basically has a modification that allows the Sage engine to have some modern upgrades, some quality of life agreements, like support for higher definitions and wide monitor support, and a few other really cool things. So there are people that are trying to take these. There are people trying to take these games and make them more playable to modern audiences. Kind of sad though that in 2025, someone has to do that to make a re-release of a franchise more palatable. I'm just saying.
I was thinking that same thing, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it also doesn't surprise me.
Also, if you go and look at the Ultimate Collection, because you can go in individual games, there are a lot of quote unquote doesn't work on modern computers. So I don't even know what the deal is with that Ultimate Collection. I would go do some research on it for yourself before you try and go tackle it. But it does have all the Command and Conquers. They also did a remaster of the original Command and Conquer that's separate from that a few years before that. So there was an attempt to modernize. I think they brought Command and Conquer and Red Alert into the modern, like they modernized it. Did a remaster. So there is, though. Okay, I will say that again. We did see Renegade again in 2006 when they released Command and Conquer: The First Decade, which was a combo pack. They were doing a lot of that at the time. They had the battle chest for WoW and whatchamacallit, and so we got the First Decade. But I will say there is something really fascinating and unique about this game that has come out of its aftermath. And that is the fact that Electronic Arts actually allowed a fan remake of this game to exist with their blessing.
Oh wow.
There is a company out there called Totem Arts that made a game called Renegade X. And Renegade X was advertised as a free remake of Command and Conquer Renegade as it came out in when it came out in 2014. Renegade X came out in 2014. At least that's how Renegade X started. That was the original vision for it. If you go to their website, still available to this day, the description says Renegade X is a free tactical shooter that brings the Command and Conquer first-person shooting experience to Unreal Engine 3. Renegade X is developed by Totem Arts, an independent group of Command and Conquer fans from around the world dedicated to bringing the world of Command and Conquer to you up close and personal. Players will be able to join up to 40 players and fight for two unique teams, either the Global Defense Initiative, a UN international military force committed to world order and peacekeeping, or the Brotherhood of Nod, a messianic international terrorist network that aims to push humanity into the next stage of human evolution.
Quite a mouthful.
Originally set to be a remake of Westwood Studios' Command and Conquer Renegade, Renegade X has evolved into the spiritual successor to the 2002 classic. Renegade X recreates and modernizes the game's unmatched multiplayer mode, which we haven't talked about yet, so here it goes. The objective of the game is to destroy your enemy's base while protecting your own. Players will be able to manage their own economies, choose from over 30 weapons, 15 vehicles, and call in nuclear strikes, ion cannons, airstrikes, and much more. Each team will have a base of operations that composes of several key structures. Each structure has its own purpose, and when a structure is destroyed, the affiliated team loses the benefits once granted. We believe that this game mode, Command and Conquer mode, can potentially revolutionize the first person shooting genre. It is a gem that went unnoticed for many years. Now is the time to uncover it.
Nice.
And really, in hindsight, the multiplayer mode, this Command and Conquer mode, is really the highlights of all the positive press this game received. If you go back and you look at the reviews for it, the campaign, run of the mill, nothing special single player campaign. But just about everyone had said that the highlights, the shining, the beacon of this game was the Command and Conquer mode. It was unique at the time. I don't know if it's as unique anymore because, we have a lot of that stuff in other games, but still, it's free and something new to try. It's first person shooter in the Command and Conquer universe. People really liked its multiplayer, but I think in an era with the Medal of Honors and Half Lives and Halos that were really bringing it with the single player experience, this game was really just kind of lost in the mix, even though it had this memorial multiplayer aspects. Because again, there were other games that were doing that too, like Halo, for instance.
Right.
Its wiki entry says, despite legal concerns from the community, Totem Arts has received support and encouragement from EA Games, as well as former Westwood Studio developers, and reviews have praised Renegade X as containing all of the high-quality action and entertainment values from a AAA big budget title. So there you go.
That's pretty
Command
high praise.
Command and Conquer Renegade still lives on. And like I said, you can play Renegade X, or last year, maybe later before, EA released that, Command and Conquer Ultimate Collection on Steam that has a dozen Command and Conquer games in it, including Renegade. And they added level editors for many of the games, which was something people have been clamoring for years. So why not just tag a level editor on the games and re-release it for money?
Very true. Why not?
So who knows? But for a brief moment in time, Westwood decided to play in a new environment, and I think unfortunately it very much contributed to their downfall.
Well, sometimes it do be like that.
In this case, it was like that. It do be indeed like that.
It does be indeed or like this.
It does be indeed like this. Well, we are talking about the end of all things Westwood. There was a time when we were talking about the beginning of all things Westwood, and that would be our episode on the beginning of the Command and Conquer franchise. I know I briefly touched on it here, but there is more to the story, more of the games that they did, more of their success, more of the people, more of how they got around. And of course, we that can be found in the Command and Conquer episode. You can find old episodes anywhere you listen to your podcasts, like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all those fun places. But of course, if you'd like to check out old episodes, check out our show notes, learn some about us, you can do so by going to our website at www.memorycardlane.com. Rob, what else can people do on our website?
You can find a calendar of our upcoming episode topics. You can find a link to our Discord server where you can come talk about either episode topics or whatever else with Dave and I. You can find a link to our Patreon where you can help support us and get access to ad-free and unedited versions of our podcast episodes. And you can find links to our social media where I am on several platforms as Rob_O_Raptor and Dave.
I can be found on various platforms as David is wrong. Each week, ladies and gents, we tell you one story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game, console, technology, person. We have an episode in the archives on a museum. If there's something fun about gaming history and I can tie it to the publication date of the episode, I roll with it. That's the challenge. That's the fun.
Yeah, it is.
While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today we covered Command and Conquer Renegade, and unfortunately its legacy is the end of Westwood Studios. But hey, that the assets, the Westwood 3D engine became Sage, and that went into a lot of games for 10 years, right?
Indeed, it did. Some positive outlook.
Some positive outlook. Every week when we sit down to do research for another episode, you know, the one thing that I really enjoy about this is that I learn new things. And as I learn something new, I get excited because I get to teach you guys, our listeners. And that's what keeps me going in this crazy world. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, so it's a beautiful cycle of teaching and learning and teaching. And in celebration of said cycle, we like to talk about our takeaways every week. So, Rob, what did you learn today?
Well, I think that my favorite takeaway from today is that despite making a whole video saying, hey, don't be late again, they still managed to be late on the release of the game. And if that's not spelling disaster, I don't know what is.
Yeah. Yeah, it is kind of sad that they slipped twice and it still was not a great game. But they were in over their heads. I mean, they there is not any other great example of them working in this type of environment. Like this was just a complete different thing for them, right? This was something completely new. And kudos to them for taking such a risk, but unfortunately in this case it didn't pay off in any way shape or form.
No, absolutely. You don't know until you try. But I just, again, I find it ironic that they went through all that effort to create that took time, resources, and still missed the date.
Yeah,
Like, I'm sure that that amount of time wouldn't have equated to finishing the game on time, but it's one of those things. It just you wonder.
true enough. True
So
enough.
that's my takeaway. How about yourself?
I piggybacking off that same thing. I really like the knowledge of the risk taking. This was, and again, unfortunately, it didn't pay off. That's the downside to it. But this was a time in when Westwood, who had been successfully making real time strategy games for years, I mean, they have some earlier stuff. They did the ports. Eye of the Beholder is a Dungeons and Dragons role playing game, right? But then they got into this groove where they were just making real time strategy, real time strategy, real time strategy. Don't get me wrong, there's other scattered whatchamacallits, but that Command and Conquer, bread and butter, right? Um, and then they just decided to say, you know what, we're gonna spend some time doing brand new things. And it wasn't just Command and Conquer and Renegade. You know, this first person shooter is one of them, but at the same time, elsewhere in the studio, they're making an MMO, a science fiction MMO, right?
Yep.
And that's not normal for Westwood Studios either. So this is basically a whole period of innovation where they're just out of their element. They're trying new things, they're doing new things, and you know, you just it works in some cases and it doesn't work in the others. Who
Well,
knows
maybe
if
they bit off more than they could chew doing it all at once.
yeah. I mean, thankfully it wasn't the end of their legacy, right? We not only did we have the engine, but we got future Command and Conquer games. Now, I would argue ever since EA took the franchise, there hasn't been a good Command and Conquer game. I don't think any of them. I don't know. I might be biased, but I don't think any of them harken back to the good old Red Alert, days. Generals was awful, and Command and Conquer 4 was just okay. It was just okay. So I don't know. At least we got the franchise, but I don't know. I think it was really brave of them to have the spirit of innovation, and it's sad to see that it didn't pay off. So
Very true.
very very true. All right, Rob. Well, before I take it into next week, is there anything that you'd like to add to today's episode?
I'll just take a quick moment to say thank you so much to our listeners. It means the world to have you with us as we learn about our weekly topics. So thank you.
Yes, indeed. Well, as we retreat from the battlefields of Command and Conquer Renegade, we're reminded of how Westwood dared to bring a beloved real time strategy franchise into the world of first person action. The studio took a bold leap, offering players a chance to step into the boots of one of their GDI commandos and experience the Tiberium conflict up close. And while it may not have redefined the first person shooter genre, Renegade remains a cult classic for Command and Conquer fans who enjoy its innovative blend of strategy and action. So whether you're storming enemy bases or reminiscing about Command and Conquer's legacy, always remember the risks and rewards of breaking genre boundaries in gaming. Next week, we're swapping the explosions of Command and Conquer for the pixelated charm of the Bandai Wonder Swan, a handheld console that dared to take on the mighty Game Boy in 1999. Designed by the legendary Gunpei Yokoi, this quirky device brought bold ideas and a library of beloved titles to handheld gaming. Join us as we explore its rise, its challenges, and why sometimes the smallest consoles leave the biggest impressions on next week's Retro Pack trip down memory card lane. Do the thing.
Dooba doom dub 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 and doo